Hello, good morning everyone. I am Thalia Georgie. I am the chair of the Health and Life Sciences at the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. We're delighted to have you with us this morning. We have three outstanding leaders from the healthcare world, which I would just like to take the opportunity to introduce now. We have Dr. Mubasher Butt, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Babylon. Mubasher will explain a little bit more about what Babylon is doing in the region, but as many of you will be aware, they are a very rapidly growing telemedicine, telehealth provider. We have Ewan Davis, who is the director of Quadria Capital. Again, Ewan will give a bit of background in terms of the investment firm he works for, but they are a specialist healthcare investment firm focusing on opportunities in Asia. And we also have Derek Goldberg, who is the managing director for Aetna, which is a health insurer, a large global health insurer with a presence in Asia, and he covers the APAC region. So we're delighted to have the panelists with us today. Many thanks for their time. In terms of format today, we will do a very short presentation, just a couple of slides, just to share with you some intelligence that we've gathered, which looks at really the outlook for the healthcare markets in Southeast Asia over the coming 12 months, before moving into the panel session. We would like to make this as interactive as possible, so please do submit your questions. I will be monitoring as best I can the questions and filtering them through to the panel. So it's a great opportunity to really learn from the sort of seasoned leaders we have with us today. Next slide, please, Sabina. So as many of you will be aware, the economic and health outlook in Asia has been very positive for a number of years. We've seen significant year-on-year growth, both in terms of GDP, but also filtering through to really significant increases in health spending. Although we do start from, as many of you will be aware, a low base in many of the markets. What we're predicting over the next 12 months, looking at various sources of economic data, including government's own economic data, but also the intelligence gathered from IMF, World Bank and others, is that GDP growth is really going to slow down and in some cases move into the negative. And there will be an increase in terms of health, there will be an impact, in terms of health spending. We are expecting health spending to slow down somewhat, and in some cases it will slow down significantly, but particularly in Singapore. So the graph that you can see on your right-hand side is our prediction for what is going to happen in terms of that health spend. So we will still see positive growth, but it won't be anything like the level of growth that we've previously seen, which could create issues, particularly for markets like Indonesia, where they are trying to push forward with universal healthcare, Vietnam as well, and certainly there may be pressures on those systems that are already in place. Next slide. And of course, as many of you will be aware, there are extraordinary pressures on traditional hospitals right at the moment. We're seeing huge reductions in utilization, people both putting off elective surgeries, but also in many cases avoiding having more preventative or diagnostic workups. And of course, compounding that issue is the restrictions that we see being placed on travel at the moment, which is affecting some of the big medical tourism centres like here in Singapore, but also a number of others as well. And so you can see on the right-hand side there, again, these are ACG predictions in terms of what we think will happen with utilization over the next 12 months, which is a significant reduction. And it really is going to push some of the private operators to a point where they have to consider their financial viability. Some of them aren't sitting on considerable cash reserves. Their cash reserves have historically been put into growth and expansion. So some of them are fairly overstretched. So we are expecting there to be an increase in distressed assets. Whether or not the governments will help prop them up remains to be seen at this point in time. But we are expecting there to be definitely a huge pressure on traditional hospitals over the next 12 months. Next slide, please, Sabina. And of course, the pace of recovery, I think, really depends on, of course, when we're able to get a vaccine out, but also I think the type of services that different sort of subsectors within the healthcare arena are involved in. And so you can see here that it may take different providers at different times to recover, and it will really depend on sort of the perceived necessity of those services, and you know, and how quickly they're able to then make that recovery. And so we're expecting for those high intensity, high need services like laboratory services, which are hugely in demand at the moment. We're expecting a fairly swift sort of V-shaped recovery for those sorts of services. But things like sort of private maternity and certainly sort of privately conducted sort of preventative diagnostic work, that may take a lot longer to return. It may be a much slower pace. So across the healthcare system, there won't be a one-size-fits-all recovery. It really will depend specifically where they play. And so over the next, I think, 12 months, it's going to be a very rocky time for healthcare, even though it is one of the more defensive sectors. And so, of course, today's session, we're really looking at this sort of macroeconomic trend and trying to think about what this is going to mean for different healthcare entities. And I think this is a great segue to bring in the panelists. And I would just ask perhaps each of the panelists in turn to reflect on their own firm and how they've really experienced the sort of repercussions of COVID, and what they're observing and how they're responding. So maybe if I start by bringing in Mubashir Butt from Babylon to kick us off.
Talia, sorry, he seems to have dropped off the line. Could we give him a second to come back on and start with the others?
Of course, thank you very much, Sabina. Let's move to Derek, if we could begin with Derek.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dalia, and good morning, everyone. So I'll start with a very brief introduction of Aetna and then move on, as Dalia has prompted, to a bit about our response to COVID-19. First, as background, we are a health insurer. We offer products worldwide, including in 7 markets across Asia. Aetna is a part of CVS Health, the largest healthcare company in the United States, and number 5 overall on the US Fortune 500. Here in Asia, many of our products serve either globally mobile individuals, meaning expats and others who travel frequently and want their insurance to travel with them, or corporate employee benefit plans that cover a similar profile of employee. Our products are generally very comprehensive, so they do cover things like pandemics without exclusion. And we also include a broad range of health and wellness related features and services in addition to the core insurance benefit. So that's a little bit about Aetna, and moving on to a bit about our response to COVID-19 and then what we see coming on the horizon in some of the areas that we've responded to. Our immediate response when COVID-19 hit in Q1, first of all, was as every company I'm sure did, we were in the middle of implementing our own business continuity plans. So the changes and evolution of our business were taking place in an environment where employees were moving to work from home, safety measures put in place. But very quickly we realized that we had a lot of work to do to support our members and reassure them in a very uncertain and evolving situation. So one of the first questions our members had was, are we covered for COVID-19. So we went out quickly and clarified that yes, we treat COVID-19 as any other viral infection, and it is covered under your benefits the way another viral infection would be. But we did take that one step further based on the anxiety around the situation. We also chose to waive any out-of-pocket liability for members. So co-insurances and deductibles have been waived for any COVID-19 related treatment. So people can have real peace of mind that they're covered for COVID-19. Next, we recognized that our members had strong concerns about going into a clinical environment, mainly for fear out of the possibility to contract COVID-19 in a clinical environment, but also because sometimes they were prohibited to do so for anything elective or minor by health authority regulations. So we chose to open up our virtual health service for 90 days to all of our members, whereas previously it was only available sort of case by case to groups that had chosen to implement the program, which allows virtual video consultations with doctors. So we opened up that service to all members, not just for COVID-19 related inquiries, but for any healthcare concern they may have. They could speak to a doctor over a video conference. And the third response was really around what became apparent very quickly is that there was a great deal of strain and stress impacting people that went beyond some of what we had seen prior to COVID-19. I mean, this is driven by lockdowns, fear of the disease, transition to work from home, having the kids at home because schools are closed. The pressures really were immense on many, many people. And so we felt we needed to address the mental health and wellness situation very assertively. So we supplemented the features that we normally have, including our products typically have a benefit where you can speak to a counselor either over the phone or in person, sort of an EAP type of a program. We supplemented that with a new AI, artificial intelligence driven platform in partnership with WISA, that's spelled W-Y-S-A, where for 24 hours a day, you can have a very human-like interaction with an artificial intelligence. It's actually a penguin that interacts with you. And for some of our members who might feel intimidated to speak to someone about very personal concerns, this has actually been an interesting and useful tool as an entry into some support for mental health and wellness, or just having someone to speak with. And then that penguin will guide you to additional resources and talk with you about your concerns. And eventually it may also offer you access to an in-person conversation, depending on where that AI-driven conversation goes. So really interesting and a demonstration of how far artificial intelligence has come in terms of being able to interact in a very human-like way. So those are just, there are many things we did, but those are 3 examples of reacting to COVID-19 and supporting our membership. And as we look forward, what I'm really interested in is understanding the changes in behavior of our membership and what that means for our business. And so coming back to a couple of things that we've done, for example, around virtual health, you know, I see virtual health as a very positive trend and a supplement to the role of in-person care. It gives us an opportunity to potentially better control costs and cut down on unnecessary treatment, and also give people more convenient access to care. So that's an agenda we had been pushing for perhaps the last 5 years. And we've seen that COVID-19 has really given that a boost and increase in acceptance. So it remains to be seen whether that behavior change will stick. Dr. Mobashar on the panel, I know, is very active in that space, so I suspect he'll have some views that he can share as well, but that's something we're very interested in watching, is that development of virtual care. The second area of change that I'm watching is around the mental health and mental wellness, which I again mentioned earlier, some things we're doing there. One observation I have, and this is not backed by a data study, it's just my observation, is that I feel like COVID-19 has started to break down some of the stigma around talking about mental health and asking for help. I mean, that had started to a degree before COVID-19, but I think this has helped accelerate it in the sense that everybody was impacted by this situation. And I think people recognize that the stress is real and that can have an impact on people. And it's okay to ask for help. And one of the ways I see that is the question of how are you? Prior to COVID-19, how are you was a formulaic question where the answer was, I'm fine, how are you? I noticed as the lockdowns began that it actually became a real question, that people were waiting to hear an answer from you and genuinely wanted to know how you were doing, with concern for your health and well-being. So I think all of this is feeding into potentially a silver lining where it's okay to acknowledge the impact of stress, and it's okay to ask for help if you need it. So we're trying to seize this moment to enhance our own mental wellness offering and get a greater awareness among our clients and our members. One final note on what we're seeing is, again, this is personal observation. I see so many more people exercising outdoors day and night than I ever saw before COVID-19. I think that started during lockdown. It seems to be continuing, and that could be another silver lining of a difficult situation, because obviously as a health insurer, we're very supportive of people taking care of their health to avoid getting ill in the first place. So those are a few comments about what we're following, what I'm interested in. And with that, Thalia, I'll pass it back over to you.
Perfect, thanks. And I think we will definitely explore some of those points more, particularly around changing consumer behaviours, which is having a huge impact in terms of the healthcare landscape. Ewan, I wanted to turn to you and obviously just find out a little bit more about what your firm is doing and what you've seen, particularly investment trend changes over the sort of post-COVID period.
Sure, thank you, Thalia, and good morning to my fellow panelists and to the audience. I recognise some of the names, so nice to see you, as it were, and nice to meet the rest of you. I'm Ewan. I'm one of the directors at Quadria Capital. We're one of Asia's largest healthcare investment firms. We manage about $2 billion of investments across the healthcare sector in South and Southeast Asia. We recently raised a new flagship healthcare fund. We expect to invest around $1 billion over the next 2 to 3 years in healthcare companies across the emerging economies of South and Southeast Asia. So, to share my perspectives on the COVID situation, our focus has really been on working diligently with our portfolio companies to help them keep their businesses running, whilst at the same time ensuring that we're protecting all of our employees, their families, patients, and customers. I think, whilst there's clearly been a significant impact on the healthcare sector, it's perhaps not been as profound on others. And whilst it's still difficult to understand the ultimate impact, there are some trends that we've noticed in our businesses, which I think are interesting, and I'll share a few of those. We're invested in a number of hospital groups, specialist hospital groups in Southeast Asia and India. And the first quarter was probably the most challenging period for us, as you were sort of at peak lockdown, if you were, and so our patient visits fell dramatically. But interestingly, I would say across the portfolio from about May onwards, as some of the lockdown measures began to ease, we actually saw a fairly robust rebound in terms of both outpatient visits and people coming to the hospital to be admitted to have elective surgeries. And in many cases, we're now seeing volumes of treatments pretty much in line with what they were prior to COVID. So in our view, as things stand, you know, we are optimistic on the long-term prospects in the delivery sector, and in particular for our hospital groups. In the pharmaceutical space, that's largely been resilient. I think we observed a similar trend in May. You know, capacity utilization dropped. We had significant logistical challenges with our supply chain. You know, the world is dealing with this pandemic for the first time, and you know, raw materials getting stuck at airports, at ports, and no one really knowing whether they could let goods move or not. That presented a lot of practical challenges as we tried to make product and then get those products back out to our customers around the world. So we do think that there'll be a lot of focus on supply chain going forwards, and how companies can either localize manufacturing, production, sourcing of raw materials, either onshore or nearshore, and that will drive a lot of investment in those sectors. We've also seen that consumer demand for over-the-counter and you know, healthcare and nutraceutical products, you know, is very elevated. Unsurprisingly, as the consumer is now more conscious, you know, acutely conscious of their own health and what measures they could take to protect themselves, principally against the virus. But I think we'll talk about this later, but I think post-pandemic, you know, there will be a period, for how long I don't know, where that health consciousness will remain elevated, and we'll see elevated levels of consumer demand. As a healthcare investor, as an overall comment, you know, protecting our investments has been very important to us and our investors. You know, our management teams have been very focused on how they carefully manage their cash flows, their investment programs, and ensuring that we're well funded to ride out the pandemic. And you're looking beyond, you know, dare I say, looking beyond COVID. I mean, you know, some good news flow coming out regarding vaccines, but of course, who knows when those vaccines will be approved and in sufficient quantity that we can all benefit from them. But that time will come. And as we look beyond COVID-19, you know, we do believe that, you know, the healthcare sector has shown resilience, and we do think that, you know, there are going to be high quality companies that are going to outperform during this period, and will prove to be very attractive investment opportunities. So, you know, we're very optimistic. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of capital that we're looking to deploy, and our enthusiasm is not in any way reduced because of the current situation. In fact, we see tremendous opportunity. But thank you, thanks to the Chamber and to Thalia and my panelists for having me along today. Looking forward to all of your questions.
Great, thank you very much, Ewan. I would not now turn to Mubasher, but I believe he's having some connectivity issues, unfortunately. So as soon as he comes in,
I think I'm okay. Yes.
Excellent, excellent.
Yes.
Great to have you with us, Mubasher. So over to you, just to give a brief background about Babylon and certainly what you've seen over the past few months.
Sure, great. Yeah, no, I'm glad I managed to resolve my technical issues in the nick of time. It's always ironic that I'm about to talk about what we're doing in the technology space in healthcare and then to experience such significant technical issues myself, but here we are nonetheless. Brilliant. Well, lovely to meet everyone. Good morning, everyone. As Thalia has mentioned a few times, you know, Babylon's a healthcare company powered by technology. And so what does that mean? It means that you can access your healthcare online, either through an app on your phone or through the web, and that connects you to a range of products and services. So Some of those products allow you to self-serve without a doctor being involved, such as checking your symptoms using cutting-edge AI to determine the right advice. You can assess your health and create a digital twin of yourself to really understand what's going on inside of your body and risk of disease in the future, so you can make behavioral changes. If needed, you can connect through to a doctor and have a telemedicine consultation, either with a GP, a specialist, a psychologist, psychiatrist. So cover both physical and mental health. And in some cases, you may of course need to see someone in person, and we can connect you to someone in person as well. So sometimes we provide that service ourselves. In other countries, we partner with others to do that. Recently, we've also moved into supporting patients with their hospital care, not necessarily when they're in the hospital, but in the run-up to their hospital admission, and then critically in the period when they're discharged from hospital, and that could be for a surgical procedure or another type of treatment, such as an oncology treatment, for example. We're a British company. We started our service back in 2014 as a small startup in London. We've grown significantly since then. We're now live, or in progress of going live, across 17 countries globally with more than 5 million users. We are here in Asia. I'm based here in Singapore. We have a significant partnership with Prudential here in Asia, and have localized our products for 11 markets here in Asia. So what have we seen or noticed, with COVID-19? And in many ways, as terrible as this pandemic has been, it has actually, certainly when it comes to the type of service we offer, acted as a real catalyst for the acceptance of digital health. And it's been very interesting to see, large organizations or individuals or bodies such as medical councils, which perhaps were previously either quite critical or certainly quite reticent when it came to this type of healthcare provision, having changed their position quite significantly. And I think, in order to really harness the power of technology, that's been really, really important to kind of have now advocates in stakeholders that previously weren't in that position. We've also seen, unfortunately, people not using healthcare services for non-COVID issues, which I think does obviously cause some alarm in terms of what kinds of issues are not presenting themselves. I think that's starting to change, but of course, with globally it being considered that we may have second waves and things like that, that may exacerbate that problem further. And I think that's something that we're certainly very mindful of, is trying to kind of make sure that not only are we managing patients who present with COVID, but also thinking about all of the other healthcare issues that we obviously had prior to the pandemic starting. I think we've also seen a change commercially. I think, our business model previously, with some clients, we provided them with our AI products, which they embedded into their own environment. For some clients, we provided a telemedicine service. But I think what has become clear is telemedicine or an app that allows you to check your symptoms is not enough. And that's something, we've kind of been thinking for some time. And actually, what this situation has done is really just consolidate a lot of the work that we've been doing for some years. And really, I think our approach to kind of helping our patients and our clients, to tackle COVID-19, we created a COVID-19 digital care assistant. And I think that's a good example of what I'm talking about here. So, the way we approached that was to think of the delivery of healthcare as a funnel. So, you enter at the top of the funnel. A lot of your healthcare needs should be able to be managed through good, high quality information, but also through the use of self-serve products, using technologies like AI. And then, of course, only if you really need to then connect to someone, do you speak to a person. Now, of course, that may not necessarily need to be a doctor. And we found with COVID-19 inquiries, actually, we've introduced a live chat service that allows you to connect with a trained professional who can manage quite a lot of those inquiries or successfully triage them to a doctor if that's needed. And what that does is it frees up very precious doctor resource to only manage cases that really need a clinician. And so if you then need to have a consultation, you can have a telemedicine consultation, and only at those that really, really need a physical consultation at the bottom of the funnel need to get to that stage. And so I think that's what we're seeing is clients are really wanting that full end-to-end service, and actually taking that a step further. I think what people are really interested in is value-based care, and thinking about how can they leverage the capabilities of, say, an organization like us to deliver an end-to-end healthcare solution for them, where we can take on the risk of managing care for a population of patients using a digitally enabled approach. And I think one of the reasons for that is, we've been able to demonstrate, certainly with some of our partnerships, such as with the NHS in the UK, is that actually, if you invest in really high quality, accessible primary care and digitize the whole pathway, you're then able to achieve some really significant cost savings in secondary care spend. And I think that's really where things are going as health systems globally are increasingly pressured, whether that be through a pandemic or, of course, all the other issues that we were acutely aware of prior to the pandemic, such as the growing burden of chronic disease. I think there's a strong need to think about not just telemedicine, but think about creating a digital ecosystem that supports people throughout their care journey. So those are some observations from me. So I'll hand back to Thalia on that.
Thanks, that's great, and it's good to hear the three different perspectives. I have done a call to all attendees. If you would like to ask a question, please start feeding them through now. But actually, I would like to sort of take Chair's liberty at the outset. I guess I observed two things in the conversation there. One is around sort of the sort of health financing piece, and how we're going to be able to continue to finance healthcare services in the future, and the others around consumer behaviour, and particularly how that impacts the model of care. But I'd like to begin with the financing one, and perhaps turn to Derek. I mean, one of the things that we've observed over this period is a huge increase in the number of people taking out healthcare policies, which is supporting a reduction in the health protection gap. I just wanted to sort of get your view on that. I mean, is this something that you think will sustain in a post-COVID environment, this increased interest in health protection, or is this something that's just sort of a blip in time and people will let their policies lapse? And I guess just to sort of a bolt on to that, I know in some markets, unfortunately, redundancies are beginning to emerge, lots of job cuts and so forth, and that may have an impact as well on employee benefits. So what would you say the outlook is for the health insurance and sort of private sort of protection landscape going forward?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Thalia. I think there's some different dynamics in the individual market versus the group employee benefits market. On the individual side, we did see a big spike in people taking out new policies right as the pandemic was hitting, and I think you alluded to that increase. And my interpretation of that is there were probably a lot of people out there who knew they should have insurance, maybe had been looking around for insurance, and then the pandemic hits and they realized it's time to stop procrastinating. I'd better get my coverage in place because there's a very serious health situation happening here. So we brought a lot of new individuals on cover in the very early stages. Once that cohort of people who were probably already quite familiar with insurance and prepared to buy had sort of run its course. What we're seeing is we saw a drop off in that spike, but now a slow build, as there is still a heightened awareness of the need for sufficient healthcare coverage. But that's also being balanced on a very severe economic situation where people are going into a cash preservation mode and may be concerned about the economic impact. So there's these two competing influences, and people are figuring out if they can afford health insurance, and more are buying. But I think that will be a long-term sustainable trend. And so our role as a health insurer is to make sure that we have the relevant products for this environment. And that includes products that have comprehensive coverage that give people the protection, but also the affordability and at the price point that they can afford to take that coverage on. On the group employee benefit side, I think we saw, again, a few scenarios. One was that groups that already have adequate coverage in place, generally speaking, were not looking to make sudden changes. They were glad to keep things steady in the pandemic environment because they have a lot of other priorities. HRs and businesses in general have a lot of other priorities. So those that are well covered stay covered. But some companies realize they had a gap and are now looking to perhaps upgrade a lower end plan to something with a little bit more comprehensive coverage. And then the third category is companies that were severely impacted by the pandemic itself economically. You know, companies in industries like travel, oil and gas, various others that were very hard hit, and they may be having trouble with affordability and sustaining the plans that they've got. So for those clients, we're working with them to figure out how do we adjust their program to meet their current economic needs while still providing sufficient coverage. So that's a bit about what we see happening in the market. And I think overall, there have been layoffs and companies closing. So far, they haven't been in Asia, really a material impact. In other parts of the world, we've seen an even greater impact. The US is very quick, for example, to respond with layoffs, but then quick to hire back. It's a very flexible work market, so there are bigger swings in enrollment and group plans. In Asia, it's been not a significant impact, but we could see certainly the potential for that to increase as the economic situation, if it goes on for a long time, we may see more impact in shrinking populations of employee benefits plans.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting, and I think you guys are a little bit more optimistic than I am, perhaps, in terms of the outlook here. And you mentioned in kind of your introduction that you're also very optimistic about the outlook here, and have certainly seen an increase in certain areas like over-the-counter medicines, consumables, and even, as you mentioned, a return to activity for hospital-based sort of settings. I mean, do you think this increase in sort of health awareness amongst the population is going to continue to translate to demand increases for sort of immunity boosting products, wellness products, all of these things? Are we heralding in a sort of golden era of consumer well-being and sort of health consciousness?
Thanks, Thalia, and yeah, great question. I think, I mean, difficult to say is the answer. I mean, clearly, right now the consumer is, health is top of mind. I wouldn't want to be quoted as, referring to our consumers. Our valuable consumers as fickle, but their spend is discretionary, and yes, of course, right now healthcare is top of mind, but in 2-3 years time, who knows? But whilst there's an incremental demand that we see at today, and there may be some elevated demand going forwards, I think the real opportunity, the golden opportunity, actually, that as you put it, is really related to the fundamental supply-demand gap in healthcare in this part of the world. You know, governments in the emerging economies in this part of the world, you know, underspend versus developed markets, some of which arguably spend, you know, excessive amounts, but that's probably another topic. Well, sorry, not excessive amounts, but, you know, managed inefficiently perhaps. And certainly comparing the spend in the emerging economies versus, you know, recommended levels from institutions like the WHO, you know, government's simply not spending enough in this part of the world to supply adequate, you know, healthcare to the population. And you have, you know, 40% of the world's population in Asia, 60% of the disease burden, and drastic underspend. So there's a huge supply-demand mismatch. And so, you know, from my perspective, that creates a very significant opportunity to the private sector to come in and try and help make a contribution to that funding deficit. So there's just not enough supply to meet the demand, and that's going to continue to provide a tailwind to the healthcare sector in this part of the world for the next 10 years. You know, and that would be my view. That was my view and continues to be my view, you know, pre and post COVID. So, you know, I don't see any diminished demand. There's a near-term focus from both consumer and government on greater funding into healthcare. You know, how that evolves over time remains to be seen. But there is just a huge unmet demand which will continue to provide tailwinds.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point, and we could almost run an entire other webinar, I think, on the mismatch between supply and demand. I mean, when we've looked at this issue ourselves, what we tend to find is there's a key affordability issue, with sort of private care being extraordinarily expensive, and the public provision often being free or very low cost, but hugely oversubscribed. And so I guess I wanted to bring Mubasher in this point. I mean, if we're able through this crisis to create a different model of care, perhaps a more affordable model of care, which kind of speaks to that unmet need, we could be really moving in the right direction, albeit, you know, prompted through a crisis. I mean, do you think, from what you've seen so far, that we are going to move into a more digitized, more cost-effective model of care, a new model of care, or are we again just a blip in time? People have started to use digital, but they'll go back to sort of traditional hospital-based care in sort of near term.
Yeah, thanks, Talia. That's a great question, and it's kind of been a really interesting time for an organisation like us. So, you know, we know from you know, having operated digital services in multiple countries over the last 6 years that actually, you know, once people try using digital healthcare, and particularly, you know, either, well, then that could be, you know, using an app to check their symptoms or assess their health, right through to a telemedicine consultation, they tend to use it again, and you know, it's really getting over that first hurdle. So I think, from our experience, certainly, I think that the fact that so many providers have created channels for patients to interact with them through a digital channel will result in a long-term sustainable change in how people access healthcare. I think, you know, the challenge, of course, will be to ensure that people are doing that in a way that works seamlessly with the rest of the healthcare system. And I think, you know, what some providers have done so far, you know, of course, and this is perfectly fine in the face of the crisis, is you know, use platforms such as what we're using now, or Skype or whatever. But actually, I think to achieve a lot of the benefits, creating specific digital products and tools to meet healthcare needs and ensure all of the data is joined up, and to ensure that you're able to monitor and care for someone throughout their care journey, using a combination of both digital products and of course clinical resource, is what is needed as we go forward.
Thanks, and I'd like to bring others in on this sort of broader question about changes to the model of care that might occur in a post-COVID world. I mean, Mubashir, you mentioned value-based care. I think that's probably music to Derek's ears. I know a lot of the insurers have been pushing for that type of model for a long time, but they have really struggled to sort of gain traction. Just bringing in Derek and then maybe Ewan, I mean, on this topic of changes to the model of care that might come about, both as sort of an economic necessity to maintain systems when, you know, we're not able to perhaps pump huge amounts more into them, but also as a result of that consumer change. I mean, what do you expect to see in terms of changes in the model of care?
I mean, it's an important question, I think, because in Southeast Asia, as well as other parts of the world, there are a number of governments who felt that government should be the universal health insurer, or at least the base level insurer for all of their citizens. And I think without exception, every one of those countries was struggling to make that work economically even before COVID-19. And now with government budgets, which are going to be severely strained by the cost of dealing with COVID-19, I think it just makes that an even bigger challenge, and more important for governments to partner with private industry to see how they can shift some of that burden, that responsibility to the private industry, which then calls for what you alluded to, Thalia, about different types of products that can serve a broad-based clientele rather than, you know, sort of just addressing the top of the pyramid. How do you come out with products that are cost-effective enough for larger populations? And I do think it comes down to things like virtual care, which is one way to reduce the cost and to get care out to people who may be remotely located. And also network, how you interact with your providers is definitely one of the key levers of the cost of the plan. And so we're very interested in value-based care. That's a well-established practice of ours in the United States. We've looked at that in Asia, and it has been tough going in terms of acceptance in the market for that type of a model where the insurer and the provider are aligned in their interests, and that means trying to keep people healthy rather than treat more and more to generate revenue. But what made that happen in the US was when the model got to a point where it was no longer sustainable in the old way, and it sort of forced providers and insurers to come together and find a different way to manage the health of the population. So this could be a catalyst for that, particularly if providers are struggling from a revenue model perspective. Governments are looking to cover broader swaths of the population with support from the private industry. All of this could potentially come together, changes in regulation and an opportunity to change the model. So that, to me, that's an exciting development, to be able to sort of break through some ingrained models and look for other ways and potentially more efficient ways to serve our clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And Ewan, perhaps if I could ask your view on this, but also the particular countries that you think that that change will happen in first as a result of this. I mean, I think Derek, you mentioned some health systems which are trying to move towards universal healthcare and not doing it very successfully. Vietnam and Indonesia spring to mind. Ewan, your perspective on this?
Yeah, great question and interesting responses and perspectives. I mean, on the topic of universal healthcare coverage, in my view, clearly it's a hugely positive development that the governments are putting those programs in place. But alluded to in some of the commentary, it's still early days, and let us not underestimate the challenge. For example, in Indonesia, of rolling out coverage to 250 million for the first time, and we're only sort of five going on 6 years into that journey in Indonesia, but giving access to healthcare to hundreds of millions of people that did not have access to it before. So from a social impact perspective, absolutely a good thing. Does it work? It works. Does it work well? I think there's a lot of challenges that they're trying to work with, and then add on a once in a century pandemic clearly doesn't help. But I also look at Thailand is probably relatively more advanced. They rolled out universal health coverage more than a decade or so ago, and you can see when it reaches a steady state, actually it provides pretty good value quality services to the population. And I think that's ultimately where all of these countries around Southeast Asia will get to. It's certainly here to stay. I think as Derek was mentioning, there is a requirement to partner with private sector to help, but not easy, because you're dealing with government, and it's not always about logic, it's also about politics, and that can present its own sort of unique challenges. But those are the changes that we see. We do believe there'll be greater partnership with the private sector. We've seen that in some of our portfolio companies. We are very bullish on diagnostics, so we have investments in a number of pathology businesses, lab businesses that are doing lots of blood testing. They're very busy doing lots of COVID testing in the region, and indeed, we've responded to calls from government to help support them with their screening programs. So that's been an interesting insight, and I think out of necessity to create those partnerships, it will help open minds and pave the way to broader partnerships going forward. So I'm optimistic there. I think we will also see greater acceptance and adoption of out of hospital care. We've also seen this in India. We have a growing business called Healthcare at Home, where we can treat actually patients, acute care patients, in a home setting. So we can provide ICU-like care, not in a hospital, but in someone's home. We can actually produce similar or better clinical outcomes at about 40% cheaper than the cost of providing that same care in the hospital, through a combination of technology as well. So that's one way in that we can help address cost and capacity, and I think we'll see greater acceptance of those models going forwards. I think we're constantly challenged by our patients to provide value for service. Certainly in the private sector, you find in Southeast Asia, probably about 70 to 80% of the patients that come into our facilities are paying out of their own pockets. They're not insured, and they're very price sensitive, price conscious. They will shop around. If they get told to go get an X-ray or a CT scan, they will go and figure out where is the cheapest. So that pressure is certainly there, and will continue. So that forces us to be very cost and value conscious. Are we doing a perfect job? Probably not, but there is certainly a big focus on cost. I also think, as a final comment, that as a consequence of that focus on value and cost, scale players are better positioned to succeed. So the large networks of provider, and there aren't a huge number in this part of the world, unfortunately, the best positioned to be able to deliver care to the masses at affordable prices while still generating economic return to reinvest and grow those services. So, lots to see.
Yeah, I mean, very, very interesting. And I guess I want to pick up, I think we have 5 minutes to close. Of course, if anyone turns on the news at any time of the day, aside from coronavirus, I think the other big thing is the sort of rising tensions between the West and China at the moment. And of course, we're beginning to see that affect sort of investor appetite within China, but also affecting players that have perhaps invested in that market, their onward growth. And they are perhaps looking for other opportunities in Asia and turning to Southeast Asia as an alternative. And we've also seen lots of companies wanting to diversify supply chains away from China and into other markets as a result of issues that arose in the pandemic. So I guess feeding into, I think, the narrative that's building, which is lots of opportunity within this for private providers to really think about how they grow, how they partner through PPPs or other initiatives with the region. Do you expect sort of the China effect to be a sort of net benefit in terms of growth of private healthcare within Southeast Asia? And perhaps if I start with you, Ewan, and then kind of work in reverse order to Derek and Mubasher.
I'm sorry, Tyler, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sorry, it was a long-winded question there, wasn't it? I guess the question in a nutshell is the China issue. As a result of kind of rising tensions with China, yeah. Do you expect investor appetite to grow for Southeast Asia away from China? Will we be a net benefactor of that issue?
Look, I think look, China is one of the largest healthcare markets in the world. Southeast Asia is not quite as big, but is growing fast. I think you have different sets of investors looking at different sets of markets. I think regardless of what's happening in China, there will continue to be a lot of investor interest in Southeast Asia. I mean, these markets are growing anywhere from 10 to 20%, depending on the sectors that you're looking at, and a little bit behind where China is. So very much of interest to investors. I think the scale of the opportunity is maybe a little bit smaller, just given the size of companies that and their stage of development. So again, it comes down to individual investors and which markets they like to play in. I think where it does create an interesting dynamic or implication for the markets we work in. We see a lot of our customers, particularly pharmaceutical, in the pharma space, where we're manufacturing drugs for large pharma, as they think about how they reorient their supply chains. We're certainly seeing demand shifting from China manufacturers over to India, and I think that's a trend that will continue in the medium term. And so that certainly benefits the Indian pharma sector, and adds value to our existing investments, and creates an even greater investment thesis for us as as we look at those markets.
And just to Mubasher and Derek, any final thoughts? I know that we're running very close to time.
Just on the China issue, I think one thing, we've been working with a number of providers in China, and I think it's quite challenging even without these rising tensions. And my concern would be that there is a risk that Chinese companies may capitalize on these tensions and make it even harder for foreign companies to do business in China. And therefore, as a result of that, we may see a net benefit for Southeast Asia, because companies may be left with no choice as to whether they want to enter the Chinese market, because it may become so inaccessible, or the environment may become so hostile or difficult to do business in, that it refocuses businesses to on efforts here in Southeast Asia. So I think that's an observation from me.
Yeah, and just to close out on that China issue, I think clearly the political and trade tensions do highlight the wisdom of not having all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, in terms of one single market, or how you access the Asia markets from one location. I think Singapore certainly stands to benefit as continuing to remain a competitive option as a financial center and a place where multinationals may choose to locate their head office. But as Ewan said, there are still going to be investors focused on China. It's too big of a market to ignore. And there are also really interesting investment opportunities in Southeast Asia. So I think it winds up becoming a bit of a dual strategy where you have to just treat these as perhaps two separate markets if you've been looking at it in the past as one Asia.
Thank you, thanks. And so I think it remains for me to close. I want to thank all of the panelists for their time and their insights, and for sharing so openly and frankly their views on the changing healthcare markets. I just want to mention very briefly what we're doing with the British Chamber of Commerce Healthcare Committee. For those of you that are members, you'll be aware, but for those that aren't, we have a very thriving Health and Life Sciences Committee where we discuss many of the issues that have been touched upon today. We have a Southeast Asia remit. It's a great forum to become involved in. So if you do want to find out a bit more about that, please reach out to me or any member of the British Chamber team. But with that, I think we can close. Sabina? I'm just going to hand across to Sabina just to...
Yes, that's fine, Dalia. We do have have you answered all the questions you'd like to answer from the audience? We do have a little bit more time if you'd like to take it.
Ah, excellent. I thought we were closing at 11, so my apologies. There are a few more. There are a few questions. I don't know if my panelists are okay to stay on the line for a few more questions.
Sure.
Let me just have a quick look at the questions that we've had come through. Lots on digital and lots on sort of changing models of care. Let me just bring up. Interesting question here about the AI components of both Babylon services and also the service you mentioned, Derek. How are you localizing that to make sure that it's appropriate for sort of different cultural norms and different sort of groups of individuals, or is it still kind of a one size fits all?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. There are certain elements, for example, the algorithms on the AI app that I was referring to, I think don't change dramatically from location to location, but the resources that it may point you to would change. So we try to direct people into resources that are locally relevant. Where we're suggesting that people speak with a counselor in person, we would seek to get them someone in market. Likewise, language is a consideration. So for our virtual health service, we've launched in Thailand in the Thai language. Other markets where we're serving predominantly expat or multilingual populations, for example, Singapore, we're quite comfortable in English language, but in markets like Thailand and mainland China, we've looked at localizing language. So there is a job to be done in terms of making sure the service and the communication is locally appropriate.
Yeah, and from our perspective, we've actually localized into 16 different languages, but we've also found one of the things that's really helpful is hiring local doctors. So we have teams of clinicians in each of the countries we operate in, and they lead on the localization process that we have for our AI products. So could be everything from changing the epidemiological models that sit behind the decision making that the AI products provide, right through to reviewing language and content to make sure that it's culturally appropriate for the populations that we serve in those countries. And so I guess because we've been doing it for some time and not just related to a COVID response, we have had the luxury of kind of time, I guess, and being able to really go into each of those markets with a full localization effort before we launch. So yeah, I guess a bit different in a COVID situation when you want to get something quickly to market.
Thanks. I hope that answers the question. We also have a couple around payment models, and one specifically for Ewan. It's mentioned here by James Elsom, so thanks for sending it through. One of the challenges with out-of-hospital care has been the funding models to support that care. So it's clear that it can drive better patient outcomes, but traditional funding doesn't really support patients to have out-of-hospital care. So are you seeing markets changing the payment structures and payment models as a result of COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Thalia, and thanks, James, for the question. It's a very good question. As we built our healthcare at home business in India, the challenges have been, one, clinical adoption, convincing doctors that it's safe to step down a patient out of an ICU in a hospital and put that patient at home, farther away from the point of care in the hospital, and also adoption from insurers as well. Although insurers are a small percentage of the payer base for that business. What we've seen over time, and especially more recently, as we continue to engage with clinicians and explain how that care can be delivered safely at home, and as they've started to use the service, that's helped accelerate adoption. So, number one, you've got to have the doctors comfortable to let their patients go and have that care at home. From a payer perspective, as I mentioned in some of my earlier commentary, the vast majority of our patients are paying out of pocket, and it is significantly cheaper to receive that care at home. So that helped drive adoption from a value perspective, and then from a outcome perspective, being at home in a familiar, clean surrounding, in an uncrowded environment, leads to better outcomes, and we've done studies to show this. But of course, at the moment, if you ask the question to a patient, do you want to receive your care at hospital or at home? Right now in the middle of the pandemic, most people, a lot of people have a fear of going to the hospital and being, exposed to the virus. They would choose to be at home. And in fact, we've started, new service lines off the back of the tailwinds that we've enjoyed as a consequence. So look, it's a model that continues to evolve. We have to do a lot of work to drive, clinical adoption. But we believe that it's a fantastic way to combine technology to address the overwhelming shortage of beds in India. And as our CEO keeps reminding us, the beds actually exist. They're just not in hospitals. They're obviously in people's homes.
Great, yeah, thank you for that. And I'm going to take one final question, then I will close again, and it will be the hard close. And Derek, it's directed really at the service you talked about at the beginning, sort of the Penguin mental health AI-driven application. Some good questions here around sort of cultural acceptance of that, how comfortable people feel about talking to a sort of an AI sort of bot about what is a very sensitive issue, and what happens to all of the data. I mean, clearly they're communicating some very sensitive things. So is that you know, pulled into their medical record, or is it, you know, completely, you know, not anonymized? You know, how does that work?
Yeah, thanks again for that question. You know, one thing that's become clear to us, particularly when we're talking about addressing sensitive areas of people's health, is that it's not one size fits all. And so the reaction has been mixed, but I'd say mixed in a positive way, in a sense that we found that some of our members prefer the human touch, and we have an option for them. We have EAP built into our products where they can get on a phone line with a counselor or a therapist and speak to a human, and that really works for a lot of people. We've also found that some people are very reluctant to open up to another person, and actually would be more comfortable opening up to an AI bot because they recognize that there's not actually a person there. They may, you know, be concerned, am I being judged? And you know, they may be intimidated to speak to a human. So it becomes one more tool in an ecosystem of resources to try to address the broad base of our membership with their various needs and how they like to interact with us. So it's a great supplement. It's not the answer for everybody. In terms of data privacy, we take that so seriously across every aspect of our business. So we work only with providers who, like us, have certified that they've done all of the GDPR requirements, all of the, in this region, PDPA requirements, and that we do a deep due diligence to make sure that the data is being treated very securely. And we also don't cross-reference that. There's a bit of a firewall, if you will, around that data and the data from other of these types of resources, even with the virtual health consultations, where it doesn't in any way feed into decisions being made about their health plan. You know, that's treated as a separate service that is supporting health. It doesn't factor into, you know, underwriting or decisions made on the insurance side. So, you know, our goal is to become the trusted advisor, access point, triage for our members. And, you know, we understand it's very important to keep those firewalls in place and the data security in place to give our members the confidence to engage in these resources.
Dalia, sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks again, everyone. I think they're really interesting insights. I think from the questions coming through, there's definitely appetite around this whole digital health area. And I know that we do have in the planning a big digital health event, which will look specifically into what we can do in this area. So please do continue to monitor the British Chamber's website for upcoming events, because we will be having a ongoing program which we would love to get you involved in. I will wrap up there. I will just hand over to Sabina to see if there's anything from the Chamber side that they wish to share before we close.
Thank you very much to our speakers and to Thalia for all your hard work and participating in this event. It's been hugely informative for our attendees, and I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the attendees for joining the session today, and we hope you got some useful takeaways from the session. So on behalf of the Chamber, thank you to you all for joining.